All right. So today we are going to talk about long run equilibrium. And I have three different graphs that I have drawn that illustrate um, an economy that's in long run equilibrium and then also showing a recessionary and an inflationary gap. So we're going to start with the long run equilibrium graph. And a couple things. I think it's important to understand that our long run equilibrium is the graph where all three curves, aggregate demand, SRAS, and LRAS, are all intersecting at one point together. And the significance of this graph is this is where our actual GDP is equal to potential GDP. So we need to remember that our short run equilibrium is always our actual. So that's wherever the SRAS and the AD interact or intersect. The LRAS is always representing our potential for our economy. So whenever the three curves are all intersecting together, that's the point where we are producing, our actual is actually our producing at our potential, which is a great spot for an economy to be. Now, some terminology that we use is when we're at long run equilibrium, we would say that we're operating at full employment. Because when we're operating at our potential, that means that we are utilizing all of our resources, or all of our resources are being fully employed. And the last thing we need to know about this long run equilibrium is that our unemployment rate at this time is going to be equal to 4 to 6%. And so those are some things that we know about an economy that's in that long run equilibrium position. Okay? Now, the next scenario we have is a recessionary gap. Now, I think it's important that we understand that when we're comparing the long run equilibrium to the recessionary gap, we did not just simply change the long run aggregate supply curve, but the long run aggregate supply curves are in the same position. YF is equal to YF in each graph. Something else had to change to create the recessionary gap, which would be either a decrease in aggregate demand or a decrease in aggregate supply. And so the end result is that our economy has now shifted or moved away from operating at its potential. And so we would say now in a recessionary gap that our actual GDP is less than our potential GDP. Our actual is less than our potential when we are in a recession. And we would say then that our economy is operating below or less than full employment. So we are not utilizing all of our resources, and so that's why we're producing less than our potential. And then the last thing we can learn about this graph is that our unemployment rate is equal to something that is greater than 4 to 6%. If we're not using all of our resources, then our unemployment rate must be higher than what it naturally would be. And so this gap right here between Y and YF, that's really what we would call the recessionary gap. And this situation would happen when an economy is operating or is moving in the contraction phase of the business cycle. Okay, now we have our last scenario. We call this an inflationary gap, and this is just the opposite of a recessionary gap. So now we can say that our actual GDP is greater than our potential. We are actually producing beyond what we are capable of producing. And this can only happen for a short period of time. And I think a good way to illustrate this is that we are using our resources at a rate that is not sustainable. We're using our resources too fast during this inflationary gap. But we can do that for a short period of time. Now, along with the actual being greater than the potential, we should know that the economy is operating beyond or above full employment. So you can see YF right here is our potential, and our actual is Y. And so our actual is past our potential. We are producing beyond the output level when we're fully using our resources. So we're using more than our normal amount of resources. And during this time frame, we would say that our unemployment rate would be less than 4 to 6%. And if I was going to give you an example, I would say that we have an economy that's operating at long-run equilibrium initially. So what I set up just like this. We've got LRES, we've got SRES, we've got aggregate demand. We know this is our real GDP. It's our potential output. Here's our price level. And now let's just say that in our example that there is an increase in consumer spending. Usually that happens because of some sort of increase in consumer confidence or something like that. But we know that that's going to cause an increase in AD. So I'm going to show that change in my graph. We were at long-run equilibrium, but now this increase in AD is going to cause the AD to shift to the right. And now my new equilibrium is going to be where my new AD curve and my SRAS curve intersect. And that shows me that the price level in the economy is going to go up and the output is going to go up. And if you look, what just happened because of the increase in consumer spending, we have created an inflationary gap. And so we have an economy that started at long-run equilibrium, an increase in aggregate demand, now took it away from long-run equilibrium and has established this inflationary gap in our economy. And so now we know that we're producing and spending at a rate that's not sustainable, but it can happen for a period of time. And if we were using the business cycle, I would say that this inflationary gap is a sign that the economy is probably at the peak or the height of our expansion.